The morning of my wedding, my grandmother held my hand, looked into my eyes, and whispered 2 words that I completely ignored. "Please wait." She was crying. Not happy tears. Not proud grandmother tears. These were the tears of someone who knew something I didn't. Something she had seen before. Something she desperately needed me to understand. I pulled my hand away, smiled, and said, "Grandma, everything is perfect. Today is the happiest day of my life." She wiped her tears, looked down at the floor, and never said another word about it. 3 years later, sitting alone on my bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, I finally understood exactly what she meant. And I would have given anything, absolutely anything, to go back to that moment and listen. My name is Emily Carter. I grew up in a small town outside of Nashville, Tennessee. Nothing special about my childhood. Simple house, simple family, simple life. My grandmother, Margaret, was the most important person in my world. She raised me after my parents divorced when I was 9 years old. My mother moved to California and started a new life. My father disappeared into his work and his drinking. So it was just me and Grandma Margaret in that little yellow house on Birchwood Lane. She taught me everything. How to cook. How to be kind to strangers. How to spot a liar. That last lesson, I clearly did not learn well enough. I met Daniel Hayes when I was 24 years old. He walked into the coffee shop where I worked on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. Tall, dark hair, jawline like something from a magazine. He ordered a black coffee, smiled at me, and said, "You have the most genuine smile I have ever seen." I laughed. I thought it was a cheesy line. But he came back the next day. And the day after that. Every single morning for 2 weeks, he sat at the corner table, ordered his black coffee, and talked to me between customers. He was charming. Funny. Smart. He worked in finance downtown, drove a nice car, dressed well. On paper, he was everything a girl from a small town could dream about. On our 3rd date, he brought me flowers. On our 5th date, he told me I was different from anyone he had ever met. On our 8th date, he said he was falling in love with me. I was completely swept off my feet. 6 months later, we were living together. A year after that, he proposed at a rooftop restaurant with a ring that made my hands shake. I called Grandma Margaret that night, screaming with happiness. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell me more about him, sweetheart. Tell me everything." I thought she was just being a protective grandmother. I told her about his job, his ambition, how he made me feel safe, how much he loved me. I talked for 30 minutes straight. When I finally stopped, she said softly, "Does he make you laugh, Emily?" I said, "All the time." She paused again. "Does he make you feel free?" I thought that was a strange question. I said yes without really thinking about what it meant. She said, "Okay, baby. I just want you to be happy." But even on the phone, I could hear something in her voice. Something careful. Something unsaid. I ignored it completely. Daniel met Grandma Margaret for the first time 3 months before the wedding. We drove down to Nashville for Easter weekend. I was nervous, not because I thought anything would go wrong, but because Margaret's opinion meant everything to me. I needed her to love him. The moment they met, Daniel turned on everything. He complimented her cooking. He helped clear the dishes without being asked. He called her ma'am and pulled out her chair at the dinner table. He was absolutely perfect. I watched Grandma Margaret's face the entire evening, looking for signs of approval. She was polite. She was warm. But she was also watching him the same way she used to watch the weather when I was a little girl, the way she looked at the sky right before a storm came, quiet and careful and reading every single cloud. After dinner, Daniel went outside to take a work call. Grandma Margaret and I sat at the kitchen table with our tea. She wrapped both her hands around her mug and said, "He is very handsome." I smiled. "I know. He is very charming. I smiled bigger. I know. Then she looked at me and said, Emily, does he ever make you feel small? The question hit me in a strange place. I shifted in my seat. What do you mean? She said, sometimes charming men, they have a way of lifting you up in public and quietly tearing you down when nobody is watching. Does he do that? I felt defensive. No, Grandma. He's wonderful. He tells me he loves me every single day. She nodded slowly. Okay. She sipped her tea. Okay. But she kept watching him for the rest of the weekend. On Sunday morning, before we left, Daniel said goodbye to her with a big smile and a hug. The moment he walked out to load the car, Grandma Margaret grabbed my arm. Not hard. But firmly. The way she used to grab me when I was about to touch something hot. She looked at me with those soft brown eyes and said quietly, Baby, I need to ask you something. And I need you to really think before you answer. I said, Of course. She said, Does he apologize? When he is wrong, does he say sorry? I opened my mouth to say yes automatically. But then I actually thought about it. Really thought about it. And a small, cold feeling started somewhere in my stomach. I said, He explains things. He helps me understand his perspective. Grandma Margaret looked at me for a long moment. She didn't say anything. She just nodded once, very slowly, and hugged me tight. It was the longest hug she had ever given me. I should have paid attention to that hug. The wedding was on a Saturday in June. The venue was a beautiful old estate outside the city, white flowers everywhere, string lights, everything I had ever dreamed about. I woke up at 6 in the morning feeling like I was floating. My bridesmaids, my best friends Sarah and Jessica, were already in the room getting ready. There was champagne and laughter and music. Everything was exactly as I had imagined. Grandma Margaret arrived at 8 o'clock. When she walked into the bridal suite and saw me in my dress for the first time, she pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears immediately. Oh, Emily, she whispered. You are so beautiful. We hugged each other for a long time. For the next hour, everything was perfect. We took photos, we did makeup, we laughed about silly things. Grandma Margaret sat in the corner chair, watching everything with this soft, loving smile on her face. But I noticed she was quieter than usual. She kept looking at me with this expression I couldn't quite name. Not sadness exactly. Something deeper. Like someone watching a clock, knowing what was coming and unable to stop it. About 45 minutes before the ceremony, everyone stepped out to give me a few quiet minutes alone. Grandma Margaret stayed behind. She came and sat beside me on the little white sofa near the window. Outside, I could see the garden where the ceremony would be held. Guests were already finding their seats. White chairs in perfect rows. Flowers on every aisle. Grandma Margaret took both my hands in hers. Her hands were small and soft and warm, the same hands that had held mine my entire life. She looked at me for a moment without speaking. I could see her trying to find the right words. I could see something moving behind her eyes, like she was making a decision. Then her eyes filled with tears. Not a few quiet tears. Real tears. The kind that come from somewhere very deep. I said, Grandma, what's wrong? Why are you crying? She squeezed my hands tighter and whispered, Please wait. Just those 2 words. I felt my heart jump. What do you mean? Wait for what? She shook her head gently. More tears fell. Please, baby. Just wait. You don't have to do this today. You can wait. I felt a rush of emotions, confusion, slight annoyance, and underneath it all, a flicker of something that felt dangerously like recognition. I pulled my hands away gently. I told her everything was perfect. I told her today was the happiest day of my life. I kissed her cheek. I stood up and smoothed my dress. She wiped her tears. Looked at the floor. Said nothing else. 2 hours later, I was married to Daniel Hayes. And Grandma Margaret sat in the front row and watched it happen, with the quiet expression of someone who had done everything they could. The first year was beautiful. Or at least, it looked beautiful from the outside. We bought a house in a nice neighborhood in Atlanta. Daniel got a promotion. I left my job to do some freelance graphic design work from home. We went on trips. We hosted dinner parties. We looked perfect together in every photograph. But somewhere in the second year, things started to shift. So slowly that I almost didn't notice. Like a room getting darker so gradually that you never reach for the light switch until you can't see it all. It started with small things. Daniel would make comments about my work. "That design looks a little amateur, don't you think?" Said with a smile. Said like he was helping. He started weighing in on what I wore. "That dress is a bit much." Or "You looked better in the blue one." Always casual. Always said like an observation, not a criticism. He would correct me in front of friends. Small things, dates, details, the way I told a story. He would interrupt with the right version, then pat my hand, then change the subject. When I tried to talk to him about how I felt, he was brilliant at explaining why I had misunderstood everything. He never raised his voice. He never said anything cruel. He just very calmly, very patiently, explained how I had taken things wrong. How I was being sensitive. How he was just trying to help me. And somehow, I always ended up apologizing. By the middle of the second year, I had gotten so small inside my own marriage that I barely recognized myself. I stopped calling my friends as much. I stopped trusting my own opinions. I would rehearse sentences in my head before saying them out loud, trying to predict how Daniel would respond, trying to avoid the conversation where I ended up feeling stupid again. I talked to Grandma Margaret every Sunday. I never told her any of it. Partly because I was ashamed. Partly because I was still trying to convince myself it wasn't that bad. Partly because somewhere in the back of my mind, I remembered her words on my wedding morning, and I wasn't ready to face what they meant. Then one Sunday she called me on a Thursday instead, which she never did. When I answered, I could tell immediately from her breathing that something was wrong. She said, "Emily, I need to tell you something. The doctor found something." In my heart. The world went very quiet. I drove to Nashville the very next morning. Alone. Daniel said he had important meetings he couldn't move, but he would try to come on the weekend. He kissed my forehead and said, "Give Margaret my love." When I arrived at that little yellow house on Birchwood Lane, Grandma Margaret looked smaller than I remembered. But her eyes were exactly the same, warm and clear and seeing everything. We sat at her kitchen table. Same table where we had always sat. She made tea even though I told her to rest. She said making tea was not optional. After we sat down, she looked at me for a long moment. Really looked at me. The way only people who have loved you your entire life can look at you. She said, "Tell me how you are." The real answer. Something broke open inside of me. I had been holding everything together for so long. And in that kitchen, at that table, with those hands wrapped around that mug, I couldn't hold it anymore. I told her everything. All of it. Every comment, every correction, every conversation where I had ended up apologizing for something that wasn't my fault. I talked for a long time. She never interrupted. She just listened with that quiet, steady attention that was the most comforting thing I had ever known. When I finally stopped, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Emily, I need to tell you something. Something I should have said more clearly on your wedding day. I was afraid of hurting you. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. I was afraid you would pull away from me if I pushed too hard. And so I only said 2 words when I should have said so much more. I said, 'What did you know, Grandma?'" She wrapped her hands around mine. "The night of Easter dinner, When Daniel went outside to take that call, I walked past the window to get something from the garden. And I heard him on the phone. He wasn't talking about work, Emily. He was talking to a woman. Very quietly. But I heard enough. The world went completely still. She continued. He said, I'll be done with all of this soon. Just be patient. And then he laughed. That kind of laugh that people use when they're performing for someone. When they want someone to feel special. I couldn't speak. She said, I didn't know what to do. I didn't have proof. I only had those words and a feeling in my stomach that had never been wrong in 78 years of living. So I watched him for the rest of the weekend. And the more I watched, the more I saw a man who was playing a role. Not living a life. Playing a role. Tears were running down my face. She squeezed my hands. On your wedding morning, I wanted to tell you all of this. But when I saw you in that dress, so happy, so beautiful, so full of hope, I lost my courage. I thought maybe I was wrong. I thought maybe I was just an old woman who saw shadows everywhere. So I only said 2 words. And I have regretted it every single day since. I put my head down on the table and cried harder than I had cried since I was 9 years old. And Grandma Margaret put her hand on my back, the way she always had, and let me cry for as long as I needed to. I hired a private investigator 3 weeks later. I know how that sounds. But I needed to know for certain. I needed facts, not feelings. It took him 11 days. Daniel had been seeing someone for almost 2 years. Her name was Victoria. She lived in Chicago. She believed they were going to be together as soon as Daniel handled some things. He had told her the marriage was already over. That he was just waiting for the right time. She had no idea he had said the same thing to me when we first started dating, that he was handling some things, that the timing would be right soon. He used the same words with both of us. I found out later he had done this before, with someone before me. I didn't scream at him. I didn't throw things. I had spent enough of my energy on this man. I simply placed the investigator's report on the kitchen table one evening, poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and waited for him to come home. The look on his face when he saw it told me everything I still needed to know. The divorce took 7 months. I let my lawyer handle almost all of it. I moved back to Nashville. Back to Birchwood Lane. Back to the little yellow house. Grandma Margaret passed away 8 months after my divorce was finalized. Heart failure, just as the doctors had warned. She passed quietly on a Sunday morning, which felt right somehow, because Sundays had always been ours. In her things, I found a small envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single index card in her handwriting. It said, "You are not what he made you feel like. You never were. I knew who you were the moment I held you. Don't forget. Grandma M." I have that card on my desk right now, as I tell you this story. I am 31 years old. I live in Nashville. I do graphic design work that I am proud of. I have dinner with Sarah and Jessica every other Friday. I take walks on Sunday mornings on the same streets where Grandma Margaret taught me how to spot a liar. I am still learning. But I am learning. And every single day, I think about those 2 words. Please wait. She knew. She always knew. And she loved me enough to try to say it, even when she didn't have the courage to say it loudly enough. So if you are watching this right now, and someone who loves you, someone who has never been wrong about the important things, is trying to tell you something you don't want to hear, please stop and listen. Because the people who love us most are sometimes the only ones brave enough to see what we refuse to see in ourselves. And sometimes, 2 words are everything. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe. A new story comes every week. I'll see you in the next one.